I wonder if you've ever felt guilty for something that wasn't actually your fault. Maybe a friend's upset, a colleague's having a bad day, your adult child hasn't replied to your message, and the dog gives you a sad look because you've only thrown the ball 47 times instead of 48. And somehow you end up feeling responsible. For many people, guilt acts like an emotional smoke alarm, and the problem is that sometimes the alarm can become too sensitive. It goes off when there's actual danger, but it also goes off because somebody sighs heavily, or sends a one-word text, or looks slightly fed up on a Tuesday afternoon. And the feeling of guilt arrives immediately and starts looking for something you've done wrong. But what if you've done nothing wrong? What if the guilt isn't telling you that you've made a mistake? What if it is simply reflecting a role that you learned to play? A lot of people grow up learning that keeping other people happy is part of their job description. Nobody may have said it directly. There wasn't a badge handed out saying, "Congratulations, you're now responsible for everyone's emotional well-being." But somehow the message gets absorbed, and you learn to notice other people's moods and smooth things over. Or perhaps you learn to avoid upsetting people, and you become very good at reading the room. In fact, sometimes you become so good at reading the room, you forget to notice what's happening in your own room, the one inside your head. And as adults, this can show up in all sorts of ways. Feeling guilty for saying no or setting a boundary. Feeling guilty for taking time for yourself, or guilty when someone disagrees with you. And feeling guilty because another full-grown adult is experiencing an emotion in your presence, which, if you think about it, is a lot of responsibility. Most of us don't expect ourselves to control the weather, yet somehow people spend every day trying to control the emotional climate of everyone around them, and that is exhausting. So something I do say to my clients, and quite often really, is that compassion and responsibility are not the same thing. You can care about somebody's feelings without becoming responsible for fixing them, and you can be kind without carrying them, and you can support somebody without taking ownership of their emotional state. And that's an important distinction. Because when you've spent years automatically taking responsibility for everybody else's feelings, guilt starts to show up whenever you stop. So the moment you say no, or prioritize yourself, or the moment you allow somebody else to be disappointed, guilt appears and says, "Excuse me, are we allowed to do that?" But feeling guilty doesn't automatically mean that you are guilty. Sometimes guilt's a sign that you've broken a rule, and sometimes it's a sign that you've broken a habit. I remember working with a client quite a lot of years ago now, who was carrying a huge amount of guilt about something that happened when she was about 6 years old, and she's now like in her early 30s. And it had stayed with her for decades. When she first mentioned it, she found it incredibly difficult to talk about it, and I was preparing myself for what was coming. I could tell she genuinely believed that she'd done something terrible. Eventually, she told me what had happened. As a 6-year-old, she'd been playing with a friend in the garden where they'd been running round, and the friend, who wasn't even near her at the time, stumbled slightly and didn't even fall over, just stumbled. And that was it. No one had been hurt, no one had been upset, nobody had even been bothered by what happened. I don't think anybody else had even noticed. Yet over the years, she built it up in her mind into something much bigger, and the guilt wasn't coming from the event, it was coming from the meaning she had attached to it. And that's something I see quite often. We can carry guilt for years, sometimes decades, not because we've done something wrong, but because of the story we created about what happened. The human mind is remarkably good at taking a moment and replaying it hundreds of times. And every time we take a memory out and put it back, it changes. And so people can add layers of interpretation and eventually treating those interpretations as facts. So sometimes we're not carrying guilt, we're carrying an old conclusion, again and again and again and again. So there is one good question that can be helpful, and it's this. Have I actually done something wrong? Or am I just feeling uncomfortable because I'm no longer taking responsibility for something that was never mine to carry? That single question can change a lot, because guilt is sometimes a signal, but sometimes it's just an old pattern. And old patterns can be changed. If you recognize yourself in this, whether it's because you're carrying responsibility for everyone else's feelings or holding on to guilt that no longer belongs to you, I'd love to help. You're welcome to book a free chat using the link below, because your past may explain your patterns. It doesn't have to define your future.